Well, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, we start this bulletin with the news that the daughter of Jacques Delors says the former president of the European Commission has died. The 98-year-old was a leading figure on the French political left in the 1980s and became known to many in Britain through his dealings with the then Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, and he was famous, of course, for the creation of the euro. France's President, Emmanuel Macron, has honoured his fellow politician in the last hour, saying he'd been a tireless architect of what he called our Europe. Jacques Delors, who's died today. Now, Police Scotland has declared a major incident, urging drivers stuck in snow on the A9 to remain in their vehicles. Footage circulating on social media shows cars stranded in the Highlands before snowplows were able to start clearing a way through to get them out. Storm Gerrit has cut power as well to 18,500 homes in Scotland due to heavy rain and strong winds. Rail passengers on the East Coast main line between London and Scotland are being advised not to travel. Thousands of travellers also facing some delays at airports, with flights grounded. And in Dover, ferry passengers have been facing delays as well of up to an hour and a half. That's due to staff sickness at the French side of the border. It comes amid increased demand at the port as thousands make their way to France for post-Christmas trips. Those who've booked ferries are being put onto the next available crossing where there isn't any space. Jeremy Hunt has announced the spring budget will be set out on the 6th of March next year. Reports are also suggesting Downing Street could axe inheritance tax and reduce income tax. Sir Keir Starmer has seemingly instructed his frontbench team to finalise their manifesto plans within weeks. The Labour leader apparently telling shadow ministers to have their policy proposals ready by mid-January. Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray, says Labour is ready to make the changes working people need.
I'm sure there'll be endless speculation about the date of the election. We're ready for it whenever it comes, because I think what people across Britain know is that the tax burden is set to be the highest in 70 years. People have already seen 25 tax rises under this government since the last election. Growth is on the floor in this country. People are worse off. People want change, and so whenever the election comes, we'll be ready for it.
James Murray. Now, in the United States, the Michigan Supreme Court has rejected an attempt to remove former President Donald Trump from the 2024 presidential ballot. The ruling is in sharp contrast with the recent court case in Colorado, where Mr. Trump was disqualified from running for president in that state due to his alleged role in the Capitol Hill riots. The decision on that has been paused pending an appeal. Here in the UK, a 16-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of arson following a fire at a school in West London. 10 fire engines and around 70 firefighters were called to the blaze at the London Oratory at around 10 o'clock this morning. The London Fire Brigade said part of the building has been damaged, but there's been no reported injuries. New figures on hospital car parking fees in England show they've risen more than 50% in the last year. Visitors and patients spent £146 million for parking during 2022 to 23. That's the equivalent of £400,000 in hospital car parks every day. The data also showed parking fees paid by hospital staff had soared more than eightfold as well, from over £5.5 million to more than £46 million. And lastly, Brits will soon be able to buy new pint-sized bottles of still and sparkling wine as part of new post-Brexit so-called freedoms. The new size will appear on the market shelves as well as pubs and clubs and restaurants. The government says the move is going to offer flexibility and choice for customers. Parliamentary Under-Secretary for Business Kevin Hollinrake says the move will benefit everyone.
Well, I think it's a really important change. We used to be able to buy pints of champagne in bottles and wine, for example, before joining the European Union. So I think it's an opportunity for innovation. Churchill's favourite size of bottle. They said it was the right size for lunch for two or for dinner for one. So I think it's a nice innovation and something we can do now we've left the European Union.
That's the news on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. This is Britain's News Channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Dawn Neeson. Now, joining me until 7 is my brilliant panel tonight. We have Conservative Life peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan. Thank you very much for coming in. And equally lovely, we have a senior politics lecturer at Queen Mary University, Dr. Richard Johnson. Thank you very much as well, especially at this time of year. So much to do, isn't there? Twixmas, I think they call it.
Yeah, I've got lots of names. Betwixmas, between, I mean, it's got lots of new names.
But the news never ends.
So we stopped saying Merry Christmas now. We can't say Happy Boxing Day, and it's not quite New Year, so it's Twixmas.
I think you move to New Year. I think you just move on to say Happy New Year. I mean, who's going to be offended anyway by having someone say Happy New Year?
Let's just hope you're having a lovely time out there. We've got a cracking show coming up for you. Now, you can get in touch with us about all that's coming up on the show, GBViews at gbnews.com and on Twitter at GBNews. Really, really simple. Now, and it's all about you as well. It's not about what we think, to be honest with you. We're just here to sort of like, you know, talk about Twixmas. Your views are the important ones. Now, with the spring budget announced for the 6th of March, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is reportedly considering scrapping inheritance tax entirely ahead of the next election, whenever that may be. Is it the right time? I mean, should we abolish the inheritance tax for good, though? I mean, I seem to have been talking about inheritance tax for almost as long as I've been talking about Brexit now. But is it finally time that we get rid of it? I'm going to come to you first, on Daniel, on this one. It's the death tax. There are some countries that don't have it. We charge 40%. It's quite a high rate. Just get rid of it. No one will notice.
Well, the argument for getting rid of inheritance tax is that it's a cruel and unusual tax that falls at a time that's determined by death, and it falls mainly on people who are neither very rich nor very poor. So the really rich people are clever and have access to means of largely avoiding it.
Exactly.
Whereas the people whose main asset is a house or something like that, and what's left of savings, end up paying it. But it wouldn't be my priority to. I mean, I do like to see tax cuts. Tax cuts are very good, but I'd like to see tax cuts that actually had a more direct effect in stimulating economic activity and provoking entrepreneurialism in this country, which we are seriously lacking now. People don't want to take risks in the economy, and they'd much rather get one of those lovely contracts from the government to get subsidies to build boilers or heat pumps or something.
Heat pumps, which are very expensive, none of us can afford.
Or bits for windmills.
Yes.
And then they don't have to worry about risk because the government's going to pay them anyway.
Richard, coming to you on this, I mean, only 4% of people in the country are subjected to inheritance tax or death tax, if you want to call it that. So is it something that... Is it almost a bit like the Rwanda scheme? It's a bit like something that everyone thinks we should be talking about, but none of us are really that bothered about?
Yeah, I mean, I would expand inheritance tax. I think it's a good tax. It's a tax...
Oh, OK.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tax on unearned wealth.
It is actually one of the most hated taxes in the country, having said everything I've just said, by the way.
Yeah, well, it's unpopular, but as you just said, it affects a small number of estates. And I think if you believe in striking a blow against intergenerational inequality, it's one of the best taxes to go against intergenerational inequality. I don't really understand how people can support social mobility or believe in equality of opportunity if they believe that a child whose parents were lucky enough to buy a house in London in the 1980s should benefit more than a child whose parents were lucky or bought a house in Blackpool in the 1980s. That, to me, seems to be completely arbitrary, and it seems like the kind of tax that would be very sensible for the government.
But Daniel, people have already paid tax on this.
Yeah,
they've paid tax on their houses, they've paid tax on their earnings.
Income. It's not unearned income in the hands of parents. And the way Richard talks about it, of course, he sees a radical disjunction between the child and the parent, whereas those of us of a more conservative disposition see parents and children and continuing generations as part of something very valuable called a family. And the family is the unit of importance here, and that wealth should be inheritable in families. It's all very well to say that it arises because you're lucky, but that might be the case in some cases. It also arises because people have worked hard, because they've taken risks, they've built up businesses and things like that. So I think what Richard is saying is good clickbait for the youth vote, which I think we might be discussing at some point later in the programme. But I don't think it really stands up to a proper Conservative scrutiny.
I don't think it's pro-family at all. I mean, I think it's a consequence of an inflated housing market in the South East, and those are the households that are affected by the inheritance tax, and probably quite rightly, because the housing market in the South East is too hot. And it's not fair, I think, for people whose parents live in rented accommodation or in a council house not to inherit this wealth, but people whose parents bought a house at the right time in the right place to do so. That doesn't seem to me that one family has made necessarily better or worse decisions than the other. It's just a case of
yes, but
luck.
you are focusing on that one case of people buying houses.
But that's where most wealth in this country is passed on, is through a house. And I think that, we have some really pressing issues that this could address. Particularly, I think there's a very good case for expanding out inheritance tax and using that funds to properly fund social care. In this
How would you expand it? How would you expand it?
How does that? Sorry, just the other thing quibble I have with Richard is that he says it addresses intergenerational issues. So the implication is that you take money off older people, old enough that they're dead, off dead people, and you give it to young people. But now, first of all, that never happens in government. There's never a hypothecation of taxes so that you can be certain they go to a particular beneficiary, if you like. The second is he's now talking about giving it into social care, which is essentially another form of
social care currently is hypothecated in council tax, because at the moment county councils and unitary councils can raise extra funds to fund social care. But this creates all kinds of inequalities.
Market, is it?
Sorry?
It's not actually youth that are living in social care.
No, this is what I'm saying, is that if the intergenerational issue is that some people will benefit from a question of luck, of chance, of nothing, not of their own doing, and often not even in the case of their parents' own doing. It may just be that their parents lived in the right place at the right time. And I don't see how that, if we believe that everyone in the country should have a fair start and that people should have a good, equal chance to succeed in life, I don't see how we should say, well, people whose parents were in this circumstance should be made a millionaire if their parents lived in London.
So how would you level it out, though, Richard? How would it work if you were in charge?
Well, if I was to think about expanding it, I would, at the moment, you don't pay anything on inheritance of £500,000 or less if it goes to a child or a grandchild. I think that those kind of exemptions should be looked at and possibly lowered.
We're not just talking London and the South East now. I mean, sort of like many cities, in the north. Yeah. The housing market is done well.
But people don't deserve, people aren't owed a house that someone else bought. And so if that means that when the grandparent passes away, that house has to be sold on in order to pay inheritance tax, I see that's no bad thing.
The end of this thought process is basically if someone is lucky enough, as you say, but also, as you say, Daniel, worked hard and owned a property and wants to leave it to their family, you don't think they maybe should be able to leave it to their family?
They can leave it to their family, but
that family should then pay as much
that family should pay tax on it, and if the house needs to be sold, the house needs to be sold. I don't think people have a right to their parent or grandparent's house. I think people do have a right to good housing, but that's where then the state should be much more active and proactive, and the state needs revenue through inheritance tax to fund, say, good social housing and good and support the ability of people to get access to housing regardless of what their parents or grandparents.
This all sounds a bit mean to me, Daniel. It doesn't sound like it's actually supporting the family and encouraging people to work hard.
No, it's not. It's not. And exactly that. It's based on this sort of radical individualism that each person is, in each generation is a unit in themselves, whereas many of us would actually rather see the core unit here as the family, and the importance of strengthening family, and the idea that property actually descends through a family. Now, that might mean that some people who are undeserving, you might say are undeserving, inherit money that they wouldn't otherwise get. I mean, somebody might be a terrible old drunk and inherit money that, and spend it all on rubbish or whatever. That can happen from time to time, but those are very rare cases. I think that the whole notion that wealth can descend through a family is really, really important to social cohesion. And we drop that in favour of this radical individualism that Richard is advocating very dangerously. I also think, as I say, that the more money you give to government, the less certain you are that it's going to be spent on anything useful or with any degree of efficiency. And that's not a party political point at all. That's the way government actually operates. It is a huge engine of waste. And the more money it has, the more it'll waste. So all this idea that it's going to solve all our problems, from social care to to social housing and all the other things that Richard has brought into it. Is this wrong? It doesn't generate enough money to do those things anyway.
So
to do all those things simultaneously anyway. It could go towards some of them. So I think I'm here defending cuts in inheritance tax, indeed arguing against the tax as a whole. Well, really, it's not my priority, however. I have said it's not my priority. I would rather see taxes cut and regulations changed that would stimulate entrepreneurialism so that capital, there is actually a risk capital left in the country and not this passive sort of government-funded capital that is ruining our economy.
What do you say?
And destroying our productivity.
I completely reject this characterisation that my position is bounded in some kind of radical individualism. For me, the main unit is the nation, is society, and that people...
As opposed to the family?
That I think that from the perspective of what government does when it taxes and looks after us all, we should be thinking about, of course we want to look after our own families, but we should also be thinking about the country and the nation that we live in and wanting to look beyond just helping our immediate families to thinking about the people who live down the street or live in possibly in completely different parts of the country, because when they succeed, all families succeed. And if we just say, well, the only people I'm going to look at in this very myopic view is just the people in my immediate family, then actually I think that we have a real problem with wider society.
Well, sounds like family versus the state on this one, doesn't it? Blimey, thank you very much. Now, we have to move on, unfortunately. The government is set to introduce a new help for first-time buyers, but is it too little too late? Have today's Tories lost young voters for good? I think I know where one of my guests might be coming from on this one. I'm Dawn Neeson on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Dawn Neeson. Keeping you company until 7 o'clock is Conservative Life here in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and Senior Politics Lecturer, I can't even say it, it's such a posh title, at Queen Mary University, Dr Richard Johnson. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, gentlemen. Now, a reminder, we want to hear your thoughts as well, because it is all about what you think. Get in touch at gbviews at gbnews.k or on Twitter at gbnews. Very, very simple. Now, let's move on. New YouGov polling shows just 11% of 24 to 49-year-olds plan to vote Conservative at the next election. Tory insiders say they need a substantive offer in place on housing to win back those younger voters. And now Michael Gove has suggested that the government could introduce new measures to help first-time buyers. Suggested, introduce at some point, eventually, da-da-da-da-da. We've heard it, haven't we? But is it too little too late? Now, I'm actually going to come to the younger member at the desk tonight, and that is Richard. Richard, I do know how old he is. I'm not going to tell you that, but he's very young. Richard, what do you make of this? Are the Tories toast with younger voters?
Yes. And
OK, that's the end of that debate.
I mean, why would they vote Conservative after the last 13 years? I mean, this latest announcement has diagnosed a major part of the problem the Conservatives have with young voters, but it comes much too late. And it just seems really quite kind of desperate flailing at the very end of a dying government. I mean, from a Conservative Party standpoint, their failure to tackle housing, an economic matter, also has knock-on consequences for their failure to reach young people in terms of the cultural politics of today as well, because young people today feel very insecure about their housing, about their job prospects, and therefore aren't able to settle, to start families, all those kinds of things that are associated with voting Conservative. So the Conservatives have doubly shot themselves in the foot here, I think.
Daniel, you are a Tory member of the House of Lords.
Yeah,
have you lost the youngsters?
Well, I think that particular generation that you mention is difficult. They have had the sort of difficulties that Richard mentions, and the government has not addressed the housing issues properly. And even today's announcement essentially makes it easier to buy rather than actually doing something to build more housing and increase supply. And nobody is addressing the issue about immigration, which in the last 2 years has added net 1.5 million people, something like that, 1.4 million people, to the population of the country, all of whom are entitled to, deserve a proper home to live in. And yet we're not building at anything like that rate. So the government, I don't think, has addressed the housing issue properly. And Richard's right about that. I think we also have to remember, though, that many of these young people hold very radical opinions, which I suspect they've imbibed at sort of left-wing universities. For example,
by university lecturers?
For example. Well, he'll know more about it than I do, of course, and he'll be able to give us the dirt. But, I mean, they are that is the generation which, according to polling, thinks that the October the 7th attack by Hamas they're more likely to think that attack was justified than any other cohort. They're more likely to have left-wing views on other issues. And I think they're partly lost to the Tories through indoctrination and brainwashing at their places of education. But I agree, we Tories have not done enough to bring them on board in material terms. But the intellectual corruption, I think, is probably even more important.
OK, Richard, so you are a left-wing radical who are corrupting young folk.
Not him personally.
If only I was so powerful.
Not personally, obviously.
If only university lecturers had that power. The reality is that, I love my students, but it's a struggle sometimes to get them to do a couple of readings a week for the seminars. So the idea that we're indoctrinating them in this kind of all-powerful way, I think, exaggerates the point. There is a lot of peer pressure that goes on, and there are different kind of social attitudes that younger people are having. Maybe some of that comes from university. Some of that might be being at university and being around other people exposed to different views in a way in which, if we go back even a generation or two, people were less physically mobile within this country. People were staying in the same community that their parents and grandparents had been. University causes people to come from all around the country, and they're exposed to different people.
The problem I've got with what you're saying, right, and it's the fact that when you say, they are a university, I didn't go to university, as you can probably tell, but when you say they're exposed to different viewpoints at university, they all seem to come out thinking the same way.
Well, so they're exposed to cancel culture as well.
Yes.
I'm not suggesting you cancel people, but the authorities are very... I mean, I'm not speaking for your particular university, but what we see generally is that dissident views that don't match the university narrative, are very often squeezed off the campus.
I think that's exaggerated. I mean, I'm a leave-voting, pro-Israel academic, and I encourage students to speak their minds, and some students have different views than me on many different issues, and that's perfectly good. I mean, in a politics department, one of the things we try to do, quite desperately try to do, is to get our students to debate each other. I think what happens, though, is when students go to university, and I think they're exposed to people from lots of different backgrounds and different parts of the country in a way that previous generations, when fewer went to university, weren't. But there is sometimes a groupthink that does form on a university campus because students are exerted to peer pressure and want to be popular and to follow the crowd. So there are these tensions that go on. But the idea that it's academics that are sort of pouring this information into these naive brains and vessels, I think is actually a gross exaggeration of what actually academics can do, or in fact academics do at universities.
So do you think there is more... I mean, expanding this topic, I mean, I think we all agree that, A, we're not building enough houses, and B, doesn't matter what the Tories say, they're never going to win. I mean, the latest statistics say 50% of 18 to 24-year-olds will never vote Tory. Now, that alludes to what you were just saying there, maybe the naivety of youth. What you think at 18, 19, 20 is completely different to what you think when you're in your 50s, obviously. But, I mean, do you think there is a more of a generation gap here now? I mean, there's always been a generation gap, obviously, I completely understand that. But there seems more vitriol now. I mean, sort of like talking about my lovely niece and my mum now. One's in their 20s, one's in their 80s. There's barely a topic they can have a conversation about without falling out on, including the weather.
Yeah, well, the weather, I've got strong views on the weather, by the way. That's another...
So's my mum. You should meet my mum.
We'll come back to that. Especially the way it's broadcast on television now, which is utterly confusing. I can't follow at all what's going to happen tomorrow.
The red warnings are a bit scary, aren't they?
It's not just the red warnings. I mean, you don't even know. You have to listen for 5 minutes. And all I want to know is it going to be wet or dry, windy or sunny or whatever. That's all I want to know. And you have to listen to this lecture about waves and isobars and things like that. People showing
Lectures
off on...
Again.
Anyway, that's another
Lecturers.
story. That's another story. I think the vitriol is, I think, not an intergenerational thing. I think that has appeared in politics by people who have stimulated the notion that if you don't agree with me, then you are a hateful figure, and or this whole notion of hate that has been introduced.
Hate's the word, isn't it? There seems to be this...
Hate is a noun, really, which, of course, hate has never really been a noun. It's really... hatred is the noun. But hate is this thing that infects. So that, I think, is not intergenerational. But I do think that there are very radically different views, intergenerational views as well. Now, I don't believe anybody who says, I'll never vote for a political party, because people's opinions do change over time and they can become more...
The people in this poll just seem to hate the Tories, using that word.
Yeah, but everyone hates the Tories at the moment, nearly. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. Nobody has a good word to say about the Tories that I can think of.
But you can see...
so it's not just the young people. And I don't believe... But certainly at the moment, they wouldn't be voting Tory. That's absolutely true. But there are things we could do for them, not just... If that was your question, not just on housing.
No,
we need to address the whole question of student debt, for example. People leaving university with ridiculous amounts of debt that they know they can never repay. That they're never expected to repay, for example. The whole thing is a Ponzi scheme and a scam, and it needs to be thought about much more seriously. That's one thing we could do. Another thing we could do is actually make it easier for people to have children. Now, I know every time I say this, people say, but what policies are actually going to work and what are your ideas? And I have very clear ideas about what they are. But at the moment, we make it really hard for young couples to have children. And the other thing I'd do, and here's my my proposal for a pretty audacious proposal, which is back in the days of the Roman Empire. They used to have
I'm not that old.
Sumptuary taxes, which were taxes on extravagant expenditure. So rich people who spent a huge amount of money showing off would end up paying tax on it. I would actually have a sumptuary limit on how much can be spent on a wedding, because I think the cost of a wedding now is a major disincentive to people getting married, and I think it should be limited maximum £3,000 to £5,000 for your wedding. The end of these £30,000 ridiculous weddings on credit cards, and make people get married more cheaply. And the prices would come down rapidly if you did that.
That went off in a tangent I wasn't expecting, as someone who got married for a couple of £100, by the way. Thank you very much.
Right.
We have to move on, we're running out of time. But I'm sure you've got a lot more to say. Right, now, the King's Christmas Message was the most watched programme on Christmas Day. Does that prove just how special and relevant the royal family is? And I've got a special festive treat for my guests. I can't wait for you to find out what that is exactly. I'm Dawn Neeson on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Dawn Neeson, sort of Dawns & Co, I guess. Any case, keeping me company until 7 o'clock is Conservative Life peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and Senior Politics Lecturer at Queen Mary University, Dr Richard Johnson, who's just confessed he's getting married in July. So that's lovely. We have some happy news as well. Now, I want to hear from you as well. Get in touch on GBViews at gbnews.uk or on Twitter at GBNews. Really, really simple. Now, .com, sorry, that's my eyes going there, that is my age. Now, nearly 7.5 million people tuned into the King's speech this Christmas, topping the TV charts yet again. Does this prove the royal family is important as ever, though, or was there really not that much on the other side to bother with, or had you had too much festive spirit by that point? So, what do we reckon to this one? Daniel, I'm going to come to you first on this one. Are we out of love with the... We watched the King's speech, and I don't know if you saw the documentary last night on the years, Charles's coronation, the year behind the scenes. Fascinating. I think that's going to do very well in the ratings as well. But we're watching them on telly, but really, are they a bit old fuddy-duddy now? We don't really care that much about it?
No, that's completely wrong. I think we love the royal family. There's a small, bitter, vitriolic band of Republicans wandering around. Not much larger than it used to be when I was a child, really. Mostly writing for The Guardian, and it's sort of clickbait to keep themselves in jobs. Everybody else, I think, is perfectly happy with the royal family. They only have to contemplate the alternative for 2 seconds to realise how dreadful it would be. And I don't think the royal family... I mean, I'm great supporters of the royal family. Interestingly, it is a family. I think the fact that it is a family, coming back to our discussion at the top of the programme, is really quite important. If it was just a series of discrete, separate individuals, then I don't think it would actually stack up to very much. But it's because it works together as a family. OK, we know they have their problems, but all families do. And I think people are very keen on... I think the King did very well. I think he's really worked his way into a role after what can only be described as, with every respect, the most difficult act to follow in the history of the last 2 centuries.
Richard, I think even you'd agree with that, wouldn't you? That the Queen's a pretty hard act to follow.
Absolutely.
But do we need them now?
I think we do. And I think when the Queen passed away, I think some people suspected that there would be this dip in the support for the monarchy. And you heard some people say, well, this is a personal tie that people have with Elizabeth II. Is it likely to continue? And actually, by and large, the support for the institution has continued. And I think, for me, the reason for that goes back to what the Labour Prime Minister Clement Attlee said about the monarchy, himself being a strong supporter of the monarchy, where he said that the monarchy doesn't belong to a particular section of society, it belongs to us all. And if we had an elected head of state, inevitably there would be winners and losers in the choice of who becomes our head of state. And it would be harder for the head of state to truly embody us all and to try to rise above the politics of the day-to-day and to think about representing the best of the nation, which is when monarchy works best, that's what it does.
Daniel, I mean, bringing politics into royalty, I mean, it has been an incredibly political year as well for the royal family. You've had the whole Harry and Meghan issue that they've had to deal with, which is, again, very, very divisive. I mean, you're either Team Harry or Team William.
Who is?
Most people seem very, very animated about this division.
They do, but I don't think there's a huge division in the nation between teams, like it's sort of 50-50. I mean, it's sort of, we don't know where we are. I think most people have got rather bored with Harry and Meghan, really, and have put them at the back of their minds and are not really thinking about them anymore. Do you think it's had an
impact on how people think about the royal family? You know, as you've said, it's like they are a family. All families have issues. This is one of the issues they've had recently. Do you think it's tarnished the image of the royal family, all the stuff we've learned about what goes on behind their closed doors?
Well, no, I don't, actually, because I think what really is important is how members of the royal family respond and how they behave. And do they behave with the sort of dignity and self-restraint that we expect from people as... following the lessons the late Queen sort of created for how the royal family should conduct itself. And I think the fact that they don't respond, that they do conduct themselves with restraint and with a degree of dignity, wins them sympathy and really makes stories eventually go away. To that extent, they're sort of they're impervious to these stories over the longer term. And I think the Harry and Meghan thing is really quite juvenile, and nobody takes it seriously as a criticism of the institution. There are other things you might think of that might be one day in the future, but at the moment, Harry and Meghan are not in that. This is tittle-tattle. This is EastEnders you know, in Buckingham
Probably more
Palace.
Shameless, to be honest with you. Have you ever watched Shameless?
No, I never watched Shameless.
No, it's very posh Shameless,
I have to
I
say, I've
think.
never watched EastEnders either, I have to admit. But
Coronation
I've
Street?
heard of it. No, no.
Emmerdale?
No, we used to watch Crossroads when I was a child, which ruled out
Right.
Coronation Street.
Right.
They were on at the same time.
Yeah, OK, fine. Richard, go on. What soaps do you watch?
I'm just a Great British Bake Off person, and that's it for me.
Getting ready for your wedding cake, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
Queen, never complain, never explain. Now, the royals going to church over Christmas. We also saw Fergie back in the royal fold, walking along with Andrew. If there has been issues with Harry and Meghan, there's certainly issues and more issues coming up with Prince Andrew. Do you think that has tarnished the royal family?
I think the Prince Andrew story has, but I think that the reaction of both the late Queen and the King to this, which is to sort of take him out of the public role. Obviously, they went as a family to the Christmas service, but was taking him out from his HRH status and so on was the right decision. The royals who are the most popular are the royals who adhere to that idea of duty, which I think is what the monarchy has evolved to become as an institution that is there to provide service and to promote different causes and people around the country and the Commonwealth, and people like Princess Anne and, quite frankly, the King himself. They just get on with it and they go out and they do that work. And their modelling, or their model for that is Queen Elizabeth II. When she died, the former Labour Prime Minister of Australia, Paul Keating, who was actually a Republican, but he gave his fair dues to Queen Elizabeth II, where he said that she aligned herself with the public realm and the public good and public duty. And again, when there are members of the royal family who seem to stray from that, and it's about private interest or private celebrity or what benefits them in the moment, those are the kind of people who will find themselves cut out of the family in the extreme. But I think that's necessary for its survival as an institution.
So cutting off Harry and Meghan, cutting off Prince Andrew would be the way to go?
Not as members of the family, and they can be privately involved in the family, but in the public role of the family, I think that was the decision that had to be taken. And I think it's proven to be the right one.
So how did you feel then, Daniel, that you saw Prince Andrew walking to church on Christmas Day with Sarah Ferguson, who hasn't been there, I think, since the early 90s?
Well, how did I feel about it?
Yeah, were you pleased to see that?
Strangely enough, I didn't feel hugely excited one way or the other about it. But the fact is that the Yorks...
But you were talking about the family earlier on, and how important the family is.
The Yorks have clearly had a strange relationship. I mean, no, not strange, an unusual relationship since their divorce, because they've sort of stayed semi-married as far as.
But they live in the same house.
Make out.
To be fair, they have got an East Wing and a West Wing.
And really, who can complain about that? I mean, the fact that two people are nominally divorced but carry on being married is surely a good thing, rather than falling apart in bitterness and having lots of quarrels. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, yes, she's effectively his wife, and if he's there, she should be there as well. She hasn't done anything.
Should he be there, though?
Yeah, I think he's part of the family. I think you've got to, as Richard says, I think there are occasions when Andrew should be there, and I think both the late Queen and the current King have made that absolutely clear, that he is not being kicked out of the family, that his public role might have ceased, but he's not being kicked out of the family. And of course, he was present, at certain functions over the Jubilee and whatever, that the Queen approved and so forth. And I think that's fine.
Did you both watch it, by the way, the King's Christmas message?
I did, yes.
Yes, you did. Did you both watch Strictly Come Dancing?
No.
I missed that one.
Which was the second highest rated programme. 7.84 million watched the King's Christmas message and 5.29 million watched Strictly Come Dancing. Next was Doctor Who, if you're interested.
I did watch Doctor Who.
Did you?
Yeah, I remember the first episode of Doctor Who. I'm just old enough to have watched it as a child. I am a Doctor Who. I remember that first. It was in a sort of scrapyard.
Yes.
And you went into the scrapyard, and I think it's been lost now, that episode, by the BBC.
They did lose a lot, didn't they?
Yeah, but you go into the scrapyard, and there was this police box in the scrapyard, and you have two young people discovering it, and of course then there's this elderly curmudgeon who comes out of it, and then with long hair, William.
It was, yes. I sort of remember it. Thank you very much. Right, we have to move on.
Great.
We have to move on, but it's getting better.
Great.
It's getting better. It's getting better. Right, how does champagne by the pint load sound? Good to me. The government's announced new imperial measures for still and sparkling wine. Are these the Brexit freedoms we bargained for, those sunlit uplands? Don't forget those. I'm Dawn Neeson on GB News, Britain's news channel. Don't go too far.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Dawn Neeson, keeping me company until 7 o'clock, and only if they're very lucky will they stay until 7 o'clock. It's Conservative Life Peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, that's that one, and Senior Politics Lecturer at Queen Mary University, Dr Richard Johnson, who has never watched Doctor Who in his entire life. Just thought I'd get that one in there. So, students, you actually may feel free to have a little word with him when you go back. No, you've been getting in touch with all your views. I'm going to read some out on the royal family, it's the last thing we're discussing. Ed, good afternoon, good evening, Ed, says, we should put the existence of our royal family to a vote. What, like a Brexit referendum type thing? You know where that's going to go, don't you? It's going to go on forever and ever and ever. Meanwhile, Alan says, the power of the monarchy is that while it exists, our head of state is assured and we will never have a politically biased president or, God forbid, a despot like some in the world today. I don't think who you're talking about there. Martin says King Charles should have handed the crown to William. Interesting. Wayne, you're not happy, are you? Wayne, I do not know anyone that respects the royal folk at all. King Charles is out of touch with everyone and a complete hypocrite. I think we should have a glass of wine for that one, don't you? Right, thank you so much for all your views. Now, a reminder, we want to hear your thoughts as well as the ones I've just read. I've got loads, but get in touch. We want more. gbviews@gbnews.uk or gbnews.uk or Twitter @gbnews. Now, fizz by the pint load. Post-Brexit licensing rules mean sparkling and still wine will be available by imperial measures from the new year. It was Churchill's ideal size to drink champagne, but do you actually care, to be honest with you? Now, to get your head around this, right, this is a normal bottle of wine at the moment, 75 centilitres. This is a pint glass, obviously. So, Churchill said this was too much. Half of a bottle was too little. But how much? What is this poured into that? How much do you actually get left in the bottle? I'm not going to drink all this, by the way, if my mum's watching. So what do we think about this one, then? Richard, we'll come to you. Imperial measures, do we care?
I think for the most part, mostly no. When the government did the consultation on this recently, the overwhelming response was don't change away from where we use metric measurements or indifference. I mean, there are certain places where, particularly when it comes to the pint that we still use for beer that we're very familiar with.
We still get mixed things, don't we, going on here?
Comfortable with, yeah. But, I mean, this is... When we moved away from imperial measures for food items and drink, it was actually really in the 90s after Maastricht where this mostly happened, and then there was that famous metric martyrs case, the Sunderland case in the early 2000s. I think the issue there was that traders were not being allowed to make a choice about whether to list in metric or imperial or both. And 20, 30 years ago, there were a very substantial proportion of the population who had grown up with one and then felt alienated when they felt that their traders couldn't just advertise in the measures that spoke to their clientele. I think things have changed so much now that most people are quite comfortable with the new system, so to speak, and so I think most people this is not, in my view, this is not a major decisive reason for or against being in the European Union.
Daniel, I've just discovered that basically, but if you do pour a big bottle of wine into a pint glass, there's not an awful lot left in the bottle.
You haven't filled up the pint glass, incidentally.
Well,
it's not a pint until it gets to the top.
Well, it depends on the pint glass, doesn't it?
Oh, does it?
It depends on whether there's a mark around it.
Is there?
Were you ever a barmaid?
Once I was, a long time ago.
A barmaid, right, yeah.
Barmaid, yeah.
OK, that's...
Yeah.
Well, you can identify as whatever you want. I was once indeed a barmaid.
I wasn't actually...
And there's a pint mark on there. Any case, you're splitting hairs. There's not a lot left in the bottle. So does it actually matter? Are we getting our knickers?
No, it doesn't matter. Well, what matters today is that we've had an announcement that the government has done the civil service has run a consultation with a relatively small number of sort of trade organisations that are bound to be don't change anything because we don't care and we're a bunch of miseries and we hate everything. And has come back and said, oh, nobody wants to do what the government said it was going to do. Amazingly, that's what the civil service always says when they do consultations. And how has the government responded to that? They said, oh, it's all right, we won't do it. Well, we will do it. We will do it for one thing, which is we'll do it for pint bottles, not pint glasses. Pint glasses,
it's a pint,
as you know, exist already. Nobody is going to order a pint of Chardonnay, but we'll do it for pint bottles of champagne and wine. But then, of course, somebody has to make those pint bottles and sell it. So this will never actually happen. I doubt you'll ever see pint bottles on the shelves. This is a completely manufactured story set up to mask the government's timidity and its retreat in the face of the civil service taking over the running of this country.
I think you will. That's what I think. I actually do think you will see some manufacturers produce these pint glass. Because I
pint bottles.
Sorry, these pint bottles.
There's plenty of pint glasses around.
Yeah, sorry.
I actually think we're not even going to have time to drink this now. We've run out of time.
Well, we've only brought one glass. I mean, it could have helped if you brought three. We'd have drunk it faster.
Got a couple of straws. Any case, thank you so much for watching tonight. I'm actually back at 6 o'clock tomorrow. Up next is Nigel Farage and taking a look back at some of his favourite moments from Talking Pints, Speak of the Devil.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It stays wet and windy over the next 24 hours, but not as wet or as windy. The rain turns more showery and the hill snow in the far north also eases, but low pressure stays with us. Storm Gerrit was named because of the very treacherous conditions we've seen across northern Scotland during the last 12 to 18 hours. And there will continue to be some heavy rain and hill snow across the Northern Isles, along with 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts for a time overnight. Elsewhere across the country, it stays windy. The rain turns to showers, and the bulk of these showers will be in the west, with some clear spells further east, but with a blustery